Greetings, amigops, and top teners everywhere. This is your co-host Kyle, welcoming you to Top 10 with Kyle and Mike. Opposite me today, as he is every week, is your other co-host, Mike. Today, Mike has prepared a top 10 list. I don't know what it is. I have no clue. He's going to relay that list to me. We're going to debate it vigorously, and by the end of the episode, we will have a definitive top 10 list for your listening pleasure. Mike, what will we be discussing this week?
All right, K-Dog. This week, we will be talking about one of our favorite characters of all time. I sure hope that you are accepting of the format of this list, and if you're not, we can scrap it immediately. I'll go to bed, and we'll do it another time. This evening, we will be talking about our dear friend, Bruce Wayne, Batman. You're giggling an awful lot. Do you have this exact thing in mind?
No, I cannot wait to see what top 10 of Bruce Wayne we are doing.
So you and I actually offline were just discussing the importance of, for big topics, tackling them in small ways so that we can really get at all the little pieces of meat on the bones. That is not what I did this evening.
Good.
I think that going forward, we should come back around to our dear friend Batman and do this. But for this evening, I want to talk about the top 10 best Batman works. So, these are the stories, the top 10 Batman stories. I've got a couple sort of rules here that I'm assuming you'll be thinking about. So, we will be comparing very much apples and oranges. So, we'll be talking about episodes of television shows, entire movies, not series, comic book sort of runs.
Okay.
I think that kind of captures it, right? Is there anything else you're thinking of? Video games.
Yeah.
So these will all be, we'll be considering an episode of Batman the Animated Series against an entire theatrical film, for example.
Sure. I assume, obviously, a film need not have been released in theaters for it to count. Like, there have been several feature-length animated Batman series.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We're including all entries in the Batman canon.
I figured as much.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The other important note is, I think, unless a work has been adapted directly,
that's my big question, because
from one medium to another, we are considering them separately. So, taking, for example, let's go outside of the Batman universe here. Logan, like Old Man Logan and Logan, I would leave it up to your discretion. But we would, because I haven't read the comic, we would only count that as the same work if Logan is pretty much shot for shot, frame for frame, as Old Man Logan is.
Okay, I can very clearly already tell where this will apply in this list, and I think they should qualify as two very different things.
Yes. And in certain cases, there's a few cases where this applies.
I can think of one that we'll be discussing probably near the top of this list.
Most likely.
All right, I'm excited. I love it. We've only alluded to our ridiculous love of Batman before, so this should be good.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk about, like I said, Batman works tonight, but I would very much like to do, like, I don't want to suggest too many, but there's a lot of other Batman lists that I'd really like, including one particularly comedic Batman list that I think you would really do great justice to. So, we'll talk about those.
Stay tuned.
Yes.
Top 10.
Foreshadowing. This is a big market tease, I believe they call that.
In the biz.
Yes. In the biz. All right, so let's get right down to it.
Yeah.
Number 10 is The Case of the Chemical Syndicate. So this is, for all intents and purposes, Batman issue 1. So this is the first appearance of our good friend Batman in Detective Comics. So this came out in 1939. It is Batman's first appearance. And the note that I made is that it fascinatingly introduces us to our good friends at the utterly ethical corporation Ace Chemicals.
Ace if we're doing a top 10 list of sinister, outwardly legal front corporations, Ace Chemical is number one, probably.
Ace has got to be number one. I gotta think it's somewhere between Ace and who's the toy company that always has abandoned life-size Jacks in the box that the Joker uses for nefarious purposes.
Those two and Oscorp are like the biggest ones, probably.
Yeah, Oscorp's a tough one. And whatever company, what's his name? The guy from the upcoming Venom adaptation, whatever his company is.
The Human, like, Corp or something dumb like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the Human Corp or Future Corp or something.
It just sounds evil.
It does sound evil.
Ace Chemical, though.
Yeah, Ace Chemical. So Case of the Chemical Syndicate is on this list for the very obvious reason. And when I say Case of the Chemical Syndicate, I'm really putting that in as a stand-in for the original Bob Kane run.
Yeah.
This introduced us to Batman. And I think it's really important for you and me and for the listeners to take stock of where the comic book world was at the time and where it is now. I mean, comic books were these bright paneled, cheery, often very sort of, they took a strong stance in a lot of realms, in politics, religion, things like that, generally in a very jingoistic manner. That is not the case with Batman. It wasn't even at the beginning, because I just read the quick summary of this. I don't know who it is. Somebody in town hall or somebody in the police department, their son is suspected of committing a murder. Their fingerprints are found on a knife.
Okay.
And Batman gets to the bottom of this crime. And we only find out that he is Bruce Wayne right at the end of the comic. It's just classic Batman at a time when classic Batman did not exist.
It is cool to see how how little this character has changed over however many years of a ridiculous number of iterations. I also think it's cool, because this is true of a lot of different superheroes in comics, is that their initial appearance is it's typically not like Batman number one. Like, they appear in something else. Like, for example, Spider-Man was in the 15th issue of Amazing Fantasy. And it was only after that issue sold really well that Spider-Man started appearing in his own line of comics.
Yeah.
Which I think is cool. And like, the leading of this particular story is very detective-y. Which like, that thread has stayed more or less throughout the Batman character ever since, which is great.
That's a really good point. I think it's a really good note. And I think it's funny when you think about the names, Marvel Comics versus Detective Comics. Like that, if that doesn't sort of presage the holy war that would come in the basically century after this, I don't know what does. Cause it speaks to exactly where Batman came from. He's a detective. He comes from this world of noir, and genre is really important to him in a way that it isn't so much for the Marvel Comics. Amen. All right. So clocking in at number 9 is an all-time favorite of ours. One that I think a lot of people think very highly of, but you and I really love. And that is Perchance to Dream.
Oh, Jesus.
So do you want to give the audience a little background on Perchance to Dream?
Yes. Perchance to Dream is the title of an episode of Batman the Animated Series. I don't remember which season.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in that really meaty stretch, like season 2 or 3.
So Batman fights a villain throughout his career called the Mad Hatter. He's a little more obscure. He focuses on really psychedelic, mind control-y type schemes.
Yep.
He manages in an altercation with Batman to fit him with a mind control device, and in an effort to basically keep him alive but incapable of stopping his plots, he basically tricks Batman into believing that he had a very bad dream in which he was the Batman, and wakes up as an adult Bruce Wayne to find that his mother and father were actually not murdered. And basically the entire episode, you don't know this, I think. I think you only find out later that he's been tricked into thinking this.
Yeah.
And the whole episode is this amazing life that Bruce Wayne leads. He has a wife. His parents are there. He finds out at the end of the episode what is really going on and struggles very deeply with whether or not he wants to snap out of this false reality that he's been under. This, more so than any other episode of Batman the Animated Series, is why it's perfect evidence for why this is not really showed intended just for children.
Yeah, well, I think what's really interesting about this episode is it drives home the point that the initial tragedy of losing his parents is this exceptionally traumatic experience, but it's not ultimately the defining bit of his life. Like, reliving that trauma is probably the defining day-to-day experience of his life, in that going out to fight crime is this act of atonement, this act of obliteration of this terrible thing that happened to him. But underneath that, like, the really very core of his being is this enduring tragedy that he doesn't get this life. And that's something that I think we lose sight of sometimes when we're seeing anything sad happen on screen, on page, but especially with Batman, because the manner of losing his parents was so shocking that we focus so much on that. It's really easy to forget that in addition to having this really violent loss of his parents, he then doesn't have parents going forward. He never has parents. He never has this normal life. That's an amazingly complex and adult theme to tackle, and it's done in a really interesting way.
Yeah, like, in watching the episode, you're right, it definitely highlights the impact of, like, what having parents would do as a compounding effect throughout the rest of his life.
Yeah. I mean, you and I have both been getting back into the Harry Potter verse recently, and I was struck by that recently in listening to some of the Harry Potter. I want to say it was Goblet of Fire, and a couple times it's really hit home, not just that Harry's parents were killed, but that they're not there. He's not having the life he was going to have. And that's this big tragedy that Batman has, that this episode tackles really well. And it definitely is just a master class in blending the high and the low, the adult and the juvenile, in a way that's just brutal.
And the climax is really compelling too, because he ends up confronting the Mad Hatter, like, atop this bell tower.
Yep.
And it's really good stuff.
Yeah.
Recommend that. I'm pretty sure Batman the Animated Series is available on Amazon Prime Video.
It is now.
This is so worth 21 minutes of anyone's time. So
yeah, that's one of the nice things about Batman the Animated Series, is it's very welcoming if you want to just drop in on the classics, and then if you want to expand, you can, but drop in on the classics.
Yeah, if you don't want to play an 8-hour video game or read a graphic novel.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of graphic novels, good segue. Number 8 is one of the all-time classics. All comic books are heavy on the origin story, but Batman has a particularly compelling one, and Batman Year One is one of the best retellings of that origin story.
I've not read Batman Year One. It's on my list.
Yeah. Well, you will thoroughly enjoy it. You may recall, you and I actually watched Batman Year One. It was on that Batman Super PAC that we had. Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So if I'm remembering correctly, this is the video adaptation of this was the one that kind of paints Jim Gordon in a slightly darker light, correct?
Yes. I do remember now.
So that's what I want to highlight on this one, is that the origin story of all comic book characters is really important, and Batman's origin was very well known for a very long time, and it's been retold many times. It's pretty startling that 50-ish years actually, this came out in 1987, after his original appearance, it was still possible to just blow people's minds with how this all started. And what I think is really cool is that this story fundamentally understands that this is not just Batman's story, it's his world. It's really important that this world feel lived in and feel really vital. And it's really cool that it follows detective at that time, Gordon.
It really follows it pretty much from his perspective, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
It definitely made, like, the Gotham Police Department feel very real and lived in, yeah.
Yeah, and that's huge, because the Batman saga doesn't work nearly as well if it's just about Batman, because you recognize that he can't work as a solo operator. It just doesn't work. And that whole motif that you get in The Dark Knight about making your deal with the devil, it's sort of highlighted as being true for Gordon. It's especially true for Batman. He does not trust that anybody's intentions are pure beyond his own, and even that he often doubts. But yet he has to work with them constantly because there's no choice. He isn't Tony Stark exactly, though he probably could be. He isn't Superman. He isn't a god like Thor. He's a guy. He has to work to some degree outside of, but alongside the system.
Further up on this list, there are some stories that lean really heavily on that concept and spell it out in pretty clear detail. So
yeah, that's a favorite. All right. So clocking in at number 7 is one of the stories that highlights the theme of detection and the fact that Batman is the world's greatest detective. Number 7 is Batman Arkham Asylum. So I chose Arkham Asylum rather than the follow-up games because Arkham Asylum is the one in this video game series that fundamentally gets that Batman is a detective. That probably the most interesting avenue into Batman's world is in his detection. His fighting is interesting, and that can make for a fun video game, but a lot of characters fight. Not a lot of characters do so much work with their minds.
I couldn't agree more. There are 4 games in this series. Probably the greatest achievement in video gaming in that series is Arkham City.
Yeah.
Arkham Asylum is easily the greatest achievement in storytelling and character and world building.
Do you remember when we were watching this and the Spirit of Arkham tapes were playing?
This is a video game trend that's become popular in the last 15 years as video games have really transformed from couch distractions into serious artistic outlets for storytelling, is the method of relaying story components through written or oral log, basically.
Yeah.
It's become very popular, and this game does it to perfection. With the Spirit of Arkham, you piece together this mystery and this story little bit at a time as you go deeper and deeper into the history of this asylum.
Yeah, and for just a little background for the listener, you are like creeping through this really terrifying asylum, and the Spirit of Arkham is this disembodied, creepy, ghostly voice that you're hearing in these series of recordings with deranged inmates.
It's incredible, and you hear, like, you get to pick up nurses and doctors' logs kind of describing the madness of all the inmates, basically all Batman's villains that he's put in Arkham over the years.
Yep.
This game is really important because as experiencing this game firsthand, you're excited to beat up villains, but it's only the third best part of the game. The second best is the stealth components because it's so important for Batman, jumping around in the rafters, sneaking up on people and using stealth to achieve your goals. But the most important thing is that this game actually forces you to think like Batman would in solving mysteries. He looks for fingerprints.
Yep.
He analyzes audio logs. We talked about this before on the Dick Villains podcast. There are Riddler riddles everywhere. You have to use your mind. There are a lot of cool perspective puzzles, following clues. It feels like a Sherlock Holmes game that happens to take place in this super eerie, insane asylum where you're trapped for an evening. It's masterful.
And it's never cheesy. I don't even know how that's possible. It's really funny to think about how it's such a razor's edge between a story that works perfectly and a story that doesn't work at all. And this idea of solving these little mysteries and perspective clues, and it could have gone so horribly wrong because you've been like, oh, I see the fingerprints over there. It's just calibrated perfectly to the right level of difficulty, to the right sort of level of variety. It's so well done. And I think you actually touched on something that I hadn't thought of, but that I think is really important about Arkham Asylum, is it picks up on the thread that I think Christopher Nolan captured especially well in Batman Begins, which is fear. That Batman is so much about fear, and you actually can watch the heart rates of the thugs in the asylum as you pick them off one by one from on top of these gargoyles. You can watch their heart rates get elevated. They start acting irrationally. If you're really smart, you can get them to do such stupid stuff. I think, can you get them to fire on each other sometimes even? Or they fire wildly for sure.
You can get them distracted, and if they're nervous enough, they'll fire off and distract other people, so you can do it.
Yeah.
What's cool about this game is you feel super empowered, like a creature of the night, like Batman is, without feeling overpowered. Because that's one thing that the later games suffer from, is in an effort to make the games feel fresh. You get new gadgets that are, and the villains start to feel like unrealistically souped up. So it becomes, there are more fighting games towards the end of the series. This game is perfectly calibrated, and we've spent a long time talking about it, but this is on my personal list, very high in terms of my favorite video games of all time.
Absolutely. Same here. All right, dog. Talking about great villains. Number 6 is the origin story of
any kind of not top 3 put together?
Didn't even want to go there.
The only thing I would say, and we've talked about this numerous times before, really did not like Justice League.
Yeah, I did not like Justice League. I flipped the TV on earlier and saw Batman versus Superman. I am so positively predisposed towards Batman that I, as you know, found some positive takeaways from that. But even with that, holy God, Justice League was so bad.
Justice League is terrible. At least in Batman versus Superman, there were some really cool scenes that did not involve Superman at all. Like, that warehouse scene where he takes all those dudes out is incredible. And like, the really dark, like, older Batman that they paint towards the beginning of that movie, like in the news and stuff, is really compelling. So anyway, we don't have to go through a whole not top 3. Just want to reiterate again, in case it's not clear, that Justice League was such utter trash.
Oh, it sucks butts. It sucks so many butts. All of the butts. It's so bad. Yeah.
We forgot to even mention butt punches.
Oh, yeah. Yes, please. Just a quick note on how Batman knocks out his thuggish adversaries.
When you dispatch baddies in the Arkham games, it's like this pre-recorded animation where a bad guy is laying on the ground and Batman like straddles him on his knees and just punches him in the head as hard as he can and knocks him out. But sometimes the animation gets screwed up so that the guy's head is like between Batman's knees, and so he's punching at the opposite end of the body, which if they're facing upwards kind of makes sense because he punches him in the dick punch that knocks him out.
It punches them so hard in the dick that they get knocked out, which is believable because I think that probably is a thing.
What's more incredible is that if they're facing down, he punches them squarely in the butt and it knocks them out, which the force you would need to punch someone in the butt to knock them out is
the most heavily protected part of the average human body.
That's the only part of that game that feels like Batman is a superhuman, that he can punch someone so hard in the butt that they are knocked unconscious.
Totally agree, but it feels like an appropriate superpower for Batman.
Agreed.
I like that.
Number 6.
Number 6, speaking of great villains, just like whatever the guy in Justice League's name is, who has those weirdly animated flying mosquito things. Steppenwolf. Was that what it was? We talked about this. It's Steppenwolf, right? Yeah. Speaking of great villains, our dear friend, Mr. Freeze, MD.
Thank you.
So, Heart of Ice.
Yes.
Oh my God.
The only question was if it was going to be Heart of Ice or Sub-Zero.
So I decided to put my personal affections aside. As abiding as my love of Batman Sub-Zero is, I couldn't in good conscience put it ahead of Heart of Ice. Heart of Ice is pretty widely considered like one of the greatest episodes of television of all time.
Yes.
Never mind animated TV, never mind Batman the Animated Series. It's one of the greatest 30 minutes of or 60 minutes, right? It's a 2-parter.
I think so.
Of television that's ever been. It follows the origins of... So, he was not created in this episode, right? But he was still very new?
Yeah, I believe so. It's been a long time since I've watched it.
Yeah, so my recollection is that Mr. Freeze, who, side note from our friend Dr. Evil, I didn't go to evil freaking medical school to be called Mr. Evil. Thank you very much. Dr. Freeze changes from Doctor to Mr. when he becomes a supervillain. Seems like an odd progression.
It's not a very good disguise.
No, it's exactly, because it's not like people are wondering whether it's him.
What's Mr. Freeze's secret identity? Like, no one questions. Like, we know
nobody
it's you.
Looks through the rolls of Gotham University Medical School and is like, there was this guy, Victor Freeze, but he spelled his name Fries at the time, and I mean, he's a doctor, for God's sake. Like,
can't be the same guy.
Yeah, it's not that great of a disguise. All that aside, this follows the story, the utterly tragic story of the now evil Mr. Freeze in his journey from a pioneering scientist in the field of cryogenics, whose own wife is stricken with it's a blood disease, I believe. She has some disease that cannot be cured. Oh my God. And Dr. Freeze, in his quest to save her, cryogenically freezes her hoping to defrost her at such time as a cure has been found for her terrible disease. Oh my God. It's a really beautiful and poignant and sad kind of story. And the thing that I think is amazing about it is all of these superhero stories, we use the term mythology, and really the point of these is to sort of imitate like these Greek tragedies, these myths. And those stories, what's so neat about them is that they stand for something huge and they feel like the definitive story of that thing. Like when you think about the story of how the sun is trailed on a chariot across the sky, it's like, what? That's the definitive story of a really elemental thing. That's how this story feels. It feels like a Greek tragedy. It feels like the story of the guy who goes too far to save the person he loves. Like it feels like it could be that one story to teach that one lesson to people all time.
I think it's cool how a lot of those tragedies, like you were saying, leave the tragic character in question kind of in a perpetual loop of like mourning. And that's exactly what this is. Like this guy is stuck. Like the permanence of Nora being on ice feels like he's stuck in this, like he's in the suit. He's also frozen in time, and like there's no way out of this loop of tragedy that he's in.
She's literally encased in ice, frozen in time. That feels like something that would happen in an actual ancient tragedy. To actually freeze somebody in time is the kind of literal exemplification of some inner state that is just so powerful.
It's great. Not in this particular episode, but like elsewhere in the series, like that's his only motivation. Like there are cases where I think the Penguin in one of the games like manages to find the vault where she's stored and like extorts Freeze into doing stuff because he has Nora, and like it's not like he's robbing banks. He's like, everything he does is an effort. Well, he will rob banks to get money to fund his research.
Yep.
But like he's a very understandable and compelling character because you wonder, like, if I was in this position, like what would I do? You know?
Totally. And it's one of those things, the only thing that keeps regular people from doing stuff like this is that they don't happen to have the particular set of skills of a Dr. Freeze. But if they did, anybody would do this. Anybody would go to these lengths to save the person they love because they love them so much and nothing else matters. If you really love somebody to exclusion the way that Dr. Freeze does Nora, it makes perfect sense.
What I think is tragic is that, or what I would love to see done in film or some other medium, is a scenario wherein he finally can cure her.
Oh.
And she comes back and realizes kind of what he's become and what he's done to get her to where she is. I think
oh fuck, you're breaking my heart right now.
Wouldn't that be a unbelievably terrible thing to behold?
Oh, it's sort of like the Kraven the Hunter thing.
A little bit like that, or as much as this particular storyline is lambasted by the fan base, kind of the Anakin Padme thing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of like the Kay and Michael Corleone, like, but the interesting thing here is that she doesn't really have a say. So she can't really be complicit in those quiet ways that like the classic mob boss wife is.
Right.
Oh man. TM, trademark. Nobody in the audience steal this idea. This is a good idea.
It's probably been done. And
there's some fanfic somewhere.
Anyways, Heart of Ice is just the best Dr. Freeze. Closely followed by Arnold Schwarzenegger's turn in Batman Forever.
What's your favorite pun from him on that one?
I think that it's tempting to go with the freeze.
Yeah.
But my particular favorite is Ice to Meet You.
Yeah, I think Ice to Meet You has got to be the best. I like chill.
Chill out.
He tells her to chill out. But yeah, Ice to Meet You is probably the best.
That Mr. Freeze is really not motivated by anything other than being swole as fuck.
Yeah, it's odd in a lot of ways that we needn't necessarily explore and perhaps could explore in another episode. But just of all people, he's not German. Yes, his surname Fries kind of seems like it could be German, but of all characters, there's none that covers up the body of the actor portraying it more than somebody in a gigantic metal suit. I don't know. It just feels like they missed a lot of the things that make Arnold so appealing.
That is
Anyway.
Batman Forever, right? The one with Clooney?
This one is Batman and Robin, that you're thinking of. Batman Forever is the one with the Riddler and the Tommy Lee Jones Two-Face. But it's the same kind of, where Chris O'Donnell is in both inexplicably. I don't totally get that, but
it is the George Clooney one and not the Val Kilmer one.
That is correct,
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Anyways, Heart of Ice, number 6.
At any rate, Heart of Ice, number 6. Alright, number 5, one that I think you may have been thinking about earlier. A very interesting sort of background to its release, where it's an animated film that was actually released in theaters, wasn't originally received quite as warmly, and is now going down as one of the great animated films, one of the great Batman, yada yada yada. Number 5 is Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
Yeah, I knew this would be high. When you read lists of the best Batman movies, this is usually like top 3.
Yeah.
Like, this is an incredible piece of, it's not film, I guess, but I mean, like, you don't have to qualify it as like a great animated movie. It's just a great movie.
Yeah. Totally. That's the neat thing about all of these is you and I both were born without the shame gene anyway, but even if we were born with the shame gene, I certainly would feel none about Batman because these are very adult themes tackled in very adult ways. And Mask of the Phantasm is an interesting one because we got earlier in Perchance to Dream this one alternate timeline where everything is fine in Bruce Wayne's life and he's never really becomes Batman. That's one road that he could have gone down. Another one, which is kind of what we're shown in Mask of the Phantasm, is what could have happened if Batman had, instead of becoming Batman, become what people fear Batman is and become kind of a murderer. Because we're shown a parallel story in this. We can give it away.
Don't spoil it.
But we're shown a parallel story where somebody goes down a much darker but similar path to the path that Bruce Wayne takes. I think that's a really cool idea because we get a good sense, I think, of the moral fiber of Batman, which it's a really interesting to see all the times where his moral fiber is tested and where the cracks in that moral fiber are shown. But I also think it can get a little cynical at times. I think it's really important we remember on some level, while we are, healthily critical of Batman, that he's a pretty remarkable person in his determination to stay on the path that he's chosen.
Yeah, it's hard to discuss this too much in detail, and I really do think it's important not to spoil this one.
Yeah.
Because if someone does want to watch it, that's part of the appeal of it. But it's true because, oftentimes Batman is put up against people that are, different enough from him. It's hard to make, a true... the Batman versus Joker comparison is a really compelling one, but it's a slightly different one than that we get here.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's kind of fun, to see in a lot of different iterations of this making fun of kind of Batman's rule. And it is... And we make fun of it all the time, too. In Batman Begins, I don't have to save you. You killed that guy.
Yeah.
But
Rick killed a guy.
Yeah, he absolutely did. But this puts it in a spotlight that it's cool to see it really focused on.
Totally. I saw there's a guy I work with who has a quote displayed in his office by G.K. Chesterton, and it's about basically just how easy it is to be cynical and how difficult it is to be positive. And even that, it's easy to be cynical about that line, and you can get really meta. No question. I like cynicism. It plays for easy laughs. But just like Parks and Rec, which we just talked about, it's really hard to be funny while looking at the world through, a really positive lens. And that's the same thing with Batman. And that's something that I think is cool about this story, is it looks at him with a generous eye and is still really insightful.
This always reminds me of, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the way that this debate usually comes about is by putting said X character up against the Punisher. The Punisher is a much more egregious and overt symbol for killing because it's literally all he does. But that storyline has been used, Spider-Man versus Punisher more, very compellingly done in TV in season 2 of Daredevil, which I recommend. But this, you don't actually get it too often that I know of. And I guess they did it really well. In Man of Steel, they tried to do it with Superman and Zod. But yeah, this is cool because I think it's also not, because in those stories, Daredevil versus Punisher, it's obviously wrong what the Punisher is doing. And there's not a lot of gray area. One side is good and one side is bad. And this particular story, like, it really, you could be convinced by the end of it, like, like, maybe it wouldn't be so bad if Batman were to be killing people, and you can't understand why his opposition in this movie is doing what they are. You know what I mean?
Yep. Totally.
It's not black and white, and it is an animated film, but it is, again, not only exclusively for children themes. So.
Yeah. Right on. Right on, dog.
All right. Brings us to 4, I believe.
We are on numero 4. Numero 4 is the definitive story, I think, in most people's eyes, of the definitive villain of all time. Number 4 is The Killing Joke.
Have you read The Killing Joke?
No. So I have not read it still because I gave it to you and I'm waiting on it. Well, it's not like I've been asking you for it. We just got to swap it.
I forgot that is your copy, and I can see it literally from where I'm sitting now.
Oh, no, it's not. It's not my copy. I got it for you. It's your copy.
Oh, okay.
No. I purchased it for you with the idea that at some point I will borrow it. No, you owe me other books, but not this one.
What books do I owe you?
I don't know. I think you have Shadow of the Wind.
I do have Shadow of the Wind.
Okay, you got at least one. Jameson's got 1 or 2, and I'm going to track his ass down.
I will get you Shadow of the Wind, and I will get you The Killing Joke when I see you in 3 weeks now.
Okay. We'll have instead of celebrating your impending nuptials, we'll just swap a bunch of books.
So, The Killing Joke is basically the definitive origin story of the Joker. Mm-hmm. It's the widely accepted origin story, basically. There are a couple of different accounts of it. The Killing Joke...
there sure are.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. The Killing Joke is incredibly upsetting. These books and TV shows and movies are all violent in a punchy kind of way.
Yeah.
This book is violent in like a very real way. And we were just talking about this central debate of Batman being able to justify taking another person's life. And like in The Dark Knight, where the Joker is obsessed with getting Batman to admit that he and the Joker are the same. Mm-hmm. In this, he does that too in The Dark Knight, but in this book, he's obsessed with doing something so heinous that he can get Batman to break that one rule. And he really goes out of his way. And it's really more than any other Batman story I can think of, hard to read and kind of upsetting because it dives into some really psychologically damaging stuff that the Joker does to a couple people in Batman's life. And it really highlights like just how manic the Joker is. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the reason that people like this one so much. Mm-hmm. It's also really beautifully illustrated. It's pretty short. It really won't take you long to read, but it really packs a wallop.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you think about how different villains and heroes are often 2 sides of the same coin. And I think it's interesting because depending on your lens, Batman and the Joker are 2 sides of any number of coins. So I think there's no question that they are 2 sides of a coin, but it's what is that coin? Like, I think that different shows and different storylines play it for different sort of things that they represent. And I don't know what your take is on The Killing Joke, but I think the most interesting version of this dichotomy that can be played up is the order versus chaos version of this formulation. And it seems like that's a big part of what The Killing Joke's appeal is that it harps very fundamentally on Batman as a symbol of order and the Joker as a symbol of chaos.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry that it's taken you this long. You will very much enjoy reading this one.
I look very much forward to it. So I think that brings us to number 3, because I don't want to do honorables. I think that there's probably going to be some overlap, and there's no way that you and I can cover the full spectrum of the just thousands of stories. So there's going to be some overlap between what you and I have been exposed to. So I'm just going to go to number 3. Number 3 is one that I know is very high on your list of favorite stories that even exist. Number 3 is The Long Halloween.
Oh boy.
So I think the thing that The Long Halloween captures so well in a way that I think is a little bit different from the top 2, which we'll get to. Number 3, I think, starts the debate on whether Batman's great appeal and what makes him different, the stories of Batman makes him different from his other superhero competitors. Is it the genre or is it the character? That's a question that I ask because I think Batman's genre is fundamentally pretty different from most of the other superheroes out there because it is so much more focused on detection and on sort of the noir tropes that you've seen from, the 1920s, 1930s and on. And that's a huge part of his appeal because you're just getting a different genre. You're reading Batman and it's not apples to apples to say Batman comics versus Superman comics because they're kind of a different genre. So that's one side of this. What is Batman's lasting appeal, I think. And then I think the other side of his lasting appeal is the character himself. Like the force of this character, how different he is because of the lack of superpowers, because of the trauma of this personal story, which is shared with a lot of other characters, but in a way that's kind of portrayed differently. I think that The Long Halloween is the best argument for this genre appeal of Batman. That this is a truly great example of the noir, the murder mystery genre.
I couldn't agree more. I think that this story, we alluded to it earlier, this concept of Batman existing as a part of a system and not as a standalone superhero. In this novel, they repeatedly allude to this notion of a three-legged stool.
Yep.
And that a three-legged stool, if you remove one of the legs, can no longer stand. The 3 legs being Commissioner Gordon, who represents the Gotham City Police, Harvey Dent, who basically like the middle ground between, the police that have to follow all the rules and Batman who has to follow none. He's kind of in that middle nebulous zone. And then, of course, Batman. This book is so masterful because it creates, it's a long time before Batman even shows up. It's creating these warring crime families in Gotham, the relationship with the police and the district attorney, family feuds, all this different stuff. This isn't a superhero novel.
No, there's a good argument to be made that this story could exist fully without Batman.
It could, and I'll argue in a minute why it's better that it doesn't, and I'll go even further. But not only is it just it's a crime story, and so it feels like very real in a way that most comics don't. But it also perfectly, as you go through each chapters, sprinkles in the villains that you know and love so much from the Batman universe in really tasteful ways. There's a chapter with the Joker. There's a chapter with Calendar Man. All of Batman's villains make appearances and have something to do with the story. And
it shouldn't work, but it really does.
And it just complements the central story. And this, and my favorite thing about this book is, well, first of all, it's the most beautifully illustrated graphic novel I've ever read.
Yep.
And it's not particularly close in my opinion, because when Batman in this novel first of all, the use of shadow is incredible. Almost the way that Harvey Dent throughout the first almost all of the book, he's almost always standing in shadow such that half of his face is obscured. It's incredible. Whenever Batman gets angry, the ends of his cape and his cowl are blurred and form they're animated as smoke, like entrails, as if he's a demon. And
he's fading into the darkness.
He literally fades into shadows and appears out of the night.
Yep.
It's incredible and couldn't be done in film, so it's very important that it's a graphic novel. And the fact that some other great Batman works draw so heavily from this storyline and the themes of this book, in my opinion, mean that this one should be a little bit higher. But that's my spiel on it for now.
So do you want to just jump into the argument then?
Yeah, let's.
Okay, so number 2 is The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight film from 2008. So I think what you're getting at is these themes of the crime saga, and the three-legged stool is huge. The triumvirate of Batman, Harvey Dent, and Commissioner Gordon is a huge piece of The Dark Knight, which is certainly borrowed from Long Halloween. Now, the reason I would argue that The Dark Knight deserves a higher place, aside from its wider commercial appeal, which I do think is important, because it did a huge bit of work in bringing Batman into a very, very wide relief. Like, Batman is way back into people's minds. He's since fallen back out because of how terribly everybody's sort of dropped the ball since. But I think that part is important, but much more importantly, I think The Dark Knight represents a pretty perfectly calibrated union of the wonderful genre tropes, the wonderful pacing of Long Halloween, with the much more intimate, character-driven, Batman-driven elements of some of the other stories. So I think that those things have to be held in tension for you to be a really great Batman story. I think The Long Halloween does it really, really well, but I think leans more towards this genre side of things. I think The Dark Knight has all of that. It has that great detective sequence where he's recreating the bullet casing out of the brick. It has the great Carmine Falcone stuff. It has the parts where he discovers all of those police officers tied together in the building, and then the timer goes off and all the police shoot at him. It has all of that. It has the Harvey Dent stuff, reimagining his scarring in a just brutal fashion, but it also has that really deep exploration of what it is that makes Batman who he is, and what it is that Batman is and isn't willing to do. So that's why I would rank The Dark Knight ever so slightly higher than The Long Halloween. I grant you, it's not as tightly told of a story. It definitely borrows from The Long Halloween, but I think the way it so perfectly holds in tension, the great genre, the world building, the secondary characters, along with I think fundamental focus on the Bruce Wayne Batman character is why I'd put it slightly higher.
It's definitely more Batman centric. In the Long Halloween, Batman is essentially a static character. He's kind of a finished product. Mm-hmm. And his influence, his importance is more. This is really more of a Harvey Dent story. The Long Halloween. Yes. Mm-hmm. I just think that the Long Halloween, because it's also just a pure mystery novel.
Yeah,
has a really satisfying conclusion with multiple endings.
It's a punches you right in the dick.
It's one of those head slapper kind of, the fact that it can do all of those things, be a great detective book, be a great noir book, be a police book, crime book, a Batman novel. It does everything without feeling jam-packed and too much, which is insane to think about. That coupled with, in my opinion, like a really definitive artistic style for depicting that universe and Batman, to me, still edges it over The Dark Knight. And you know me, I love The Dark Knight. It's one of my favorite movies ever. I think this is maybe not a holy war like we've discussed before, but we're arguing between two of the greatest Batman, two of the greatest pieces of content ever, not just Batman content. So I love the length of The Long Halloween. Like, reading The Long Halloween over the course of a couple weeks in my case was just such an unbelievably beautiful experience. It took me that long because you have to look at every single panel, because just reading a comic book is a quarter of its content. Most of the story is told in the way it's lighted, in the way it's drawn, and I think obviously it's different than a movie, but I don't know. I've never been affected by a graphic novel like I was reading The Long Halloween. That's just, maybe it's a personal thing for me.
Well, we'll have some horse trading ahead of us, because if there ends up a list where The Long Halloween is number 2, I'm not going to be too put off by it.
Well, what's number 1 then?
I think you probably can guess what number 1 is. Number 1 is The Dark Knight Returns.
I figured as much.
So, The Dark Knight Returns, for those of you who don't know, which if you're still listening, you almost assuredly do know what it is. It's the story of Bruce Wayne coming out of retirement in his late 50s to save the world. I think the really fundamentally crazy thing about this story is that it advances the idea of this superhero who's aged, who's gotten the shit kicked out of him, who, if we imagine it in sort of the Dark Knight Rises version, has no cartilage left in his knees, who suffered all these concussions, who almost certainly is doomed to a life of, CTE and Alzheimer's and dementia later in life, who there's no way he sleeps through the night. He must be in so much pain. And yet he comes out of retirement to save the world once again. It's such a cool concept, and it's so utterly believable out of Bruce Wayne in a way that it just wouldn't be for anybody else, because Superman doesn't really feel pain. You can't imagine Superman doing this because, whatever, he's fine.
Well,
yeah.
You said it. You can't imagine it because, you don't understand what it feels like to be weak to kryptonite, but you can imagine what a failing human body would feel like.
Absolutely. And to make us believe that Batman cares so deeply about saving this city that he's worked so hard to protect in a way that I think shows his evolution from guy fighting to, scratch away some of the pain of losing his parents to guy who feels really strongly about saving the people and the city around him. The fact that that's believable is just remarkable.
Yes, I would like to point out that the artistic style of this particular book really leans into that motif because it's very, it's like Mad Maxy almost.
Oh, it's very Mad Maxy.
Yeah, it's apocalyptic and it's like zombie almost,
yeah,
very
cyborgs and shit.
It's kind of separate from a lot of the feel that you get from a lot of other Batman content.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels more superhero-y. And just the way he's illustrated, he's got these crazy broad shoulders and this huge jaw, and he's massive. It's a really striking visual that I like a lot.
Yeah, but I wish, it's interesting because deep down a part of me wishes that this exact story would have been told in the world of something like Long Halloween.
Yeah.
So that would be sort of my one critique of The Dark Knight Returns, is that I like the world of Long Halloween better, but I like this Batman and this concept of Batman better. Because this is, to me, what draws me and millions of people around the world ceaselessly back into the world of Batman, is that the idea of somebody so deeply connected to this one idea, to this one goal, is so compelling. It's so compelling to think of somebody who wants one thing so deeply. And I think for me, what's really cool about this is it, like I said earlier, it represents this shift from the one thing being revenge and making himself whole to making the people around him whole, which is an even more compelling idea because it's taking the idea of progress in comic books, which is totally against all the rules of comic books to have the character make progress. And it's building that into this character in a way that feels so believable. And it feels really earned. Even the broad shoulders, I think, are a really conscious decision to show the character's development. This is a guy who over the years has grown bigger and bigger in his quest to protect all of the people around him. I think that that's an intentional choice.
Oh, unquestionably.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to argue really strongly at the top of this list like this because they're all such great things. We can discuss it a little more in detail, I guess, in a minute. I'm going to rattle through some honorable mentions. I have quite a few here. And we don't have time to get into it. I'm just going to rapid fire here.
Yep.
I think seriously a really good piece of Batman content is the Lego Batman movie.
Yeah.
It actually really kind of hits you it explores a theme that wasn't really explored to a great extent in a lot of the ones we've talked about already on this list. The concept that Batman is terrified of having personal relationships because he's afraid of having them taken away from him.
Yeah.
That theme is explored really effectively in the Lego Batman movie. Mm-hmm. And that movie was hilarious and so lovingly crafted. So many awesome Batman Easter eggs and hints thrown in there. I'm serious about that one. I really like the Lego Batman movie.
Okay.
My personal favorite episode of Batman the Animated Series, The Grey Ghost.
Yeah.
Wherein you learn about young Bruce Wayne's love of a TV show. It's super meta. The Grey Ghost is basically the Batman of the Batman universe. He's a comic book detective, and in this episode of Batman the Animated Series, a supervillain is performing crimes that appeared in the old show, and so Batman has to find the actor that played the Grey Ghost because there are no existing tapes of the old show. And the actor comes out of retirement in his Grey Ghost. It's amazing.
And he's voiced by Adam West.
It's really meta. It really pays homage to the concept of like the role of a hero, even a fictional one, in a young person's life, which is what Batman is to all of us. I named my gray Toyota Camry the Grey Ghost. Obviously it has a lot of personal relevance for me. One of my favorite books, Gotham by Gaslight. It's Batman imagined. I think it's like what, Victorian or not Victorian. Yeah. Victorian era England, basically at the time of Jack the Ripper. Mm-hmm. And imagines what that iteration of Batman would be like, and incredible. I love that book. The original, or not the original, but kind of like the popularization of Batman movies, Batman, the 1989 version with Michael Keaton, made it possible for Batman to actually be like a big screen success. And I think a lot of the later, I think better Batman films owe this one a lot.
Very much so.
Batman Begins, so criminally overlooked in that trilogy, really brought Batman back in a huge way after a really long hiatus. Really addresses the theme of fear like we discussed, and made Batman this really terrifying creature of the night on the big screen for the first time.
Yep. And importantly, as we think about movies that need another look, The Dark Knight Rises has since become so underrated, so overrated. It's now underrated. It's cycling back and forth. It is currently criminally underrated.
Agreed. Under the Red Hood, which I think that one probably has some serious chops. It explores a storyline that I will not spoil, but one that has been done numerous times in the Batman universe, but none better so than in Under the Red Hood.
Yep.
Exploring some of the trauma that might occur to someone that functions in a role like Batman does, and the dangers that puts people in a role like that.
Yep.
Similar to The Killing Joke, a really kind of viscerally upsetting story. Sub-Zero, another Mr. Freeze story that we both happen to love a lot. Sideshow, another really great episode of Batman the Animated Series.
That's such a great episode.
Probably not serious, but it's basically...
Who knew Killer Croc could be relatable and interesting?
It's a really sad story where Killer Croc escapes Arkham Asylum and ends up traveling with basically a freak show, a circus freak show that kind of travels on their own, and he, for the first time in his life, actually fits in with a group of people, only to be
a little kid with the flippers. Oh my god.
Unbelievable. Only to be pursued into the wilderness by Batman, and it's a great episode.
Oh, that's such a good episode.
The last two, no particular episode, but the animated series Batman Beyond, which I loved as a kid.
Yeah, don't forget. That was so good.
Love Batman Beyond. It's like a Spider-Man 2049 parallel, takes place in the near future where Batman is super old. They were seriously considering making a live action movie in which Clint Eastwood would have played an older Batman. Which would have been pretty
I wouldn't have hated it.
So I love that show. The last one, I don't remember in what context we saw this, but it was, I think, part of that 4-pack. And,
it was.
Oh my god, Mike. Basically, it's these 4 kids explaining to each other what and who Batman is. And as each one explains it, their idea of what Batman is shown on the screen in very, very different animation styles. The one kid, they're just walking home, kicking a rock around in the street. The one kid says, Batman is a robot. And I saw him do this and this and this. And it shows an animatronic Batman. And he's like, no, you're totally wrong. The way kids do, You're wrong. He's a shadow beast. No. He's actually a vampire bat that's an absurd size. And they have this debate about the legendary figure of Batman. And I'm serious about this one because it paints this picture of this legendary figure that the Batman is, this figure that's shrouded in mystery, and it totally highlights the point that Batman could be anyone or anything, and that he needn't be one thing. He just needs to be whatever it is for a particular person, or whatever it is. That's a really, really incredible piece of animation.
I love that so much.
We should look up what it's called, but it seems like we can't put it on the list since we don't even know what it's called and couldn't find it with a quick Google search there. But that's one of my favorite Batman stories, especially since we didn't really know what it was at the time when we first watched it, and we're just floored.
That was very unexpected. I think I got that from the bargain bin at Walmart. It was a 4-movie pack, and it was so great because our experience, the serendipity of our seeing that, the way it was shown on the screen, it's exactly what Batman's all about. He's a legend. He's like Babe Ruth. You don't know exactly what he did, but you heard about it from somebody down the street.
Yes, precisely. So maybe that's one is just like our personal pick and one of our favorites, but doesn't make the list quite seriously.
Yeah. All right. So let's get down to the hard work. Talk to me about what you think is vulnerable.
I think the Case of the Chemical Syndicate makes sense. It's one of our homage picks that we like to do.
Yep.
I think I think you've done a really good job of ranking here. I think if there are vulnerable ones, it's towards the bottom of the list. I would actually want to keep Perchance to Dream because it's more of a Batman-centric story than Heart of Ice is.
Yep.
I think I would actually say Heart of Ice is a little vulnerable.
Ooh.
I know, it's tough. But because that's such a Freeze-centric story, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that is true.
In that case, I'm not really serious about Lego Batman. It doesn't quite fit, but I think it deserves like a serious like number 11 or number 12 spot.
I do agree with you because I think it captures nicely that balance between cynicism and childlike openness to the wonder of this world.
Yeah. I think the one I would probably want to toss on there is maybe Under the Red Hood. I think that's the one I feel most strongly about.
I think that's a very good addition to this.
Yeah. The rest are ones that I love, but that I think fall somewhere past number 10. So if you're comfortable with that, I'd like to, I don't know. I think what I might do, and I think the ordering is where we want to have some more serious debate. What do you think about removing Heart of Ice and adding Under the Red Hood just for our content?
It hurts so badly.
Does that make sense though? Because I think like as far as like actual content goes, like that's a better episode of television than Perchance to Dream is. But I guess it comes down to what this list aims to be, because there's no other story on this list that highlights the Batman story as well as Perchance to Dream does in terms of the effects of losing one's parents has on one's psyche.
All right, let's pull Heart of Ice and just mutually agree that it's the greatest episode of television ever, okay? On 3. 1, 2, 3. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Is. It's just not quite Batman centric enough. Is its only crime.
Okay.
Okay. I think that's
his only crime was that he loved me.
Okay. Ordering.
Yeah.
Hot take. I really think The Long Halloween should be number 1. I think it's the greatest Batman story there is.
Hot take. I think you're right.
I think it's number 1.
Yeah.
I think that Dark Knight Returns should be number 2. I think that The Dark Knight, while clearly being the best Batman film there is, I think there's some justice to the top 2 being graphic novels. And The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises as films pull so much from these stories. It feels right to me. But The Dark Knight should and could not possibly slot out of our top 3. Does that seem fair to you?
Hot take. I'm down.
Okay. I really like the rest of the list, what you did with it. I actually think I like it exactly as is. The only thing we have to figure out, I think, is where we slot Under the Red Hood in.
Yeah. Without getting too specific about why, I think that we have some good content that treads on some similar ground near the top of this list.
I agree. I think it should slot under Arkham Asylum.
Yes.
I think I would put it maybe at number 9, just because like the medium is so similar to The Mask of the Phantasm, just the fact that it's an animated film. Whereas Perchance to Dream is our highest ranking animated series episode. Arkham Asylum is our video game, and Batman Year One I just don't think I think is better than Under the Red Hood. So that feels
I think that's exactly right.
Then what we have just done is made our definitive list of Batman stories, basically.
It feels an awful lot like that. I hope this was not too expansive a list for the purposes of this.
We have missed so many Batman things.
Yeah, we didn't even mention, like, Nightfall, Death in the Family, Hush, whatever.
Oh.
I know.
It's a very subjective list, and these are ones that we've all shared together, so.
Absolutely. I think that's a big part of it. This is a love letter to our enjoyment of Batman together.
Certainly.
Yeah, and we will most certainly touch on a few more specific Batman-centric issues in the coming episodes.
No doubt.
All right, want me to rattle it off?
Please do.
All right, number 10, Batman's first appearance in The Case of the Criminal Syndicate. Number 9, Under the Red Hood. Number 8, the heartbreaking Perchance to Dream. Number 7, the world building, wonderful Year One. Number 6, the dick punching, the butt punching Arkham Asylum. Number 5, the also heartbreaking Batman Mask of the Phantasm. Certainly a theme of these. Number 4, the shockingly heartbreaking Killing Joke. Number 3, the wondrous The Dark Knight. Number 2, the deeply inspiring The Dark Knight Returns. And number 1, I think rightly so. I think we came to it in the end.
People, read this graphic novel. Read it.
Do it. It is like a Raymond Chandler mystery with the violence dialed up to 10 and the Batman dialed up to 13. Number 1, the greatest Batman story of all time, Batman: The Long Halloween.
No doubt. Fantastic. That was fun. Long overdue.
Yes, long overdue and a true joy.
Excellent. Well, if you're still keen, I'll see you next week, man.
All right, dog. I'm still keen.
Aight. Peace.
All right, peace. Alrighty, friends. That was our top 10 for this week, but now we'd love to hear your top 10. So please check us out on all of our available social media outlets, traditional outlets, whatever outlets we have. Check us out on Twitter at top10km. That's all spelled out, top10km. Our email, top10km, spelled the same way, at gmail.com. Or our site, top10km.podbean.com. All forms of communication accepted, except for serial killer notes. Please don't send us any of those.
If you like the pod, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never have to miss an episode of Top 10 ever again. If you didn't like it, please tell us why. We'll try to make the show better. Our theme music was composed by Kevin MacLeod, and our artwork was created by Erin Sant. You can check out her stuff at Sant Design on Instagram.
Alrighty, goons. We'll see you next week.